Hello. Welcome to our study at New Life Community Church. This Wednesday, November the 11th, which is Veterans Day, is a study in Genesis, and specifically, it's the touch of God. This is the famous story, and you can see two paintings, one by Rembrandt, of the touch of God. This is Jacob wrestling with an angel. So we're going to look at this passage in Genesis 32, and we're going to see how, in fact, Jacob wrestled with God, although the scriptures all show him wrestling with an angel. We'll get into this and look at this. So let's kind of set the stage. We're in chapter 32, verse 1. Jacob had a falling out with his brother after he stole the birthright, and he left and went up to Haran. On the way back, he knew that his brother was coming to meet him. He thought perhaps there would be a conflict. In fact, they both had so many people. They had a little army of soldiers, and so he was ready to negotiate and see if he needed to fight. And so it says, so Jacob went on his way, and he was getting ready to go meet Esau. And the angels of God met him. And that's pretty powerful, that he was on his way to deal with this, and right in the middle of it, God shows up and meets him. These angels of God told him that, look, it's not like you think. It's not just a physical struggle. There's a spiritual warfare here, and there is a need here for God to work. And so what did he do? He saw them, and he said, this is God's camp. And he called the name of this place Mahanaim. Anytime you see the "im" on the end of a word in Hebrew, it means it's plural. This means camps. Now, you can't see this in the English, but the word camp is all throughout this passage. I'll show you a few of them. So he says, in other words, this is a place where God is. So we're skipping to verse 9, where he had prayed, and he said, O God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, the Lord who said to me, return to your country and to your family, and I will deal well with you. I don't know if you remember last week, God said, I'll be with you until I finish dealing with you. And here he told him, it's time for you to go back to your home. And then Jacob, in a prayer of humility, says, I'm not worthy of the least of all the mercies and of all the truth which you have shown your servant. For I crossed over this Jordan with my staff, and now I have become two companies. There's that word camp again. He said, I started by myself, and you don't know if you remember, but when he went that way, he didn't have anything, and now he has two camps or two groups of people. He says, God, you've blessed me, and I realize it's not because of who I am, but you have shown mercy, and you have shown grace. Anytime we get in a problem, it's important that we recognize that God is the way out. And it's not anything we've done because we are not worthy. And Jacob, who was the jokester, trickster, has now become the humble man. And by the way, he took lots of donkeys and cows and camels, and he sent them to Esau as an offering to him. And so we see in verse 21, now we skip, the present went on over before them, that is, all these gifts, but he himself lodged in the camp. There's the word camp again. It occurs 7 times in this passage. And I like the two camps, the physical and the spiritual. And so he arose that night and took his 2 wives, that's Rachel and Leah, his 2 female servants, and his 11 sons, and crossed over the ford of Jabbok. There was one more son to be born. So he's got these sons with him, and he went over the river at the Jabbok River. So he decided to take them away from him. And he took them and sent them over the brook and sent over what he had. So he has got everybody with him, all of his kids. He's ready. He thinks he's ready for the fight with his father. He's not. He's ready for the fight for his life. So Jacob was left alone. Now that's interesting. He came over this brook by himself. Do you remember when he met God at Bethel? And he said, God, if you'll give me food and drink, I'll serve you. And here he is coming back. He has all these possessions. He sent them away, and here he is alone. A man wrestled with him until the breaking of day. And that's interesting. A man wrestled with him. As we shall see, I don't think it was a man. I don't think it was an angel. I think it was actually Christ. We'll see this in just a minute. So this man wrestled with him. So he is in a wrestling match, and they're fighting, and they're holding on to each other. And when he saw that he did not prevail against him, and I think that's deliberate, but if you look at it, he could mean the man or Jacob, and the second he and the third can. I'm pretty sure, just looking at the passage, that he says, now when the man saw that the man could not prevail against Jacob, see, he was fighting so hard that this man that was wrestling could not prevail against Jacob. He touched the socket of his hip, and the socket of Jacob's hip was out of joint as he wrestled. So it's interesting that here's this being who is so strong that he can just with one hand touch the hip and it's out of the socket, and yet he wasn't prevailing against him. I think that's because Jacob wanted this. Jacob knew that there was a spiritual struggle and he wanted to win. And you'll see in just a minute why I tell you that this is the Christ. And then the angel said, the man said, let me go, for the day breaks. And you'll see in a minute why that's important. They wrestled all night. The day is coming. He says, let me go. And Jacob said, I will not go unless you bless me. He's hanging on for dear life. He's not letting go of the source of his blessing. Isn't that amazing? And then he said to him, what is your name? The angel said to Jacob, the man said to Jacob, what is your name? And he said, Jacob, Jacob, the laughter, the trickster. And he said, your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have struggled with God and with men and have prevailed. The name Israel means one who struggles with God. And he says you've struggled with God and with men. We certainly know about the men with Jacob and with Esau and with Laban and all the people around him. But here we find out he struggled with God. So what he's saying here is, I'm God. That's why I think this is the Christ. In fact, I believe that any time in the Old Testament that you see God, that it is the Christ. It's pre-incarnate, that is before he became in the flesh. Like when the Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were in the furnace and there was a fourth one in there like the Son of God, I believe it is the Christ. And when Moses wanted to see God, and God said, I'll walk in front of you and you can see my backside, and he saw the back part of him, I believe that was the Christ. Anytime God appears in the flesh, I believe that it is the Christ. It is God in the flesh. And look here, he didn't say you struggled with an angel. He said you've struggled with God and you have prevailed. So then Jacob said, tell me your name, I pray. What is your name? He wants to know God's name. It's interesting. God's name is Yahweh, and he wanted to know it 400 years before Moses knew it. And God said, why is it you asked me my name? But he blessed him there. And so he gave him a blessing right there. And he said, I will not let go unless you bless me. And here he not only renamed him, he blessed him. So I want you to catch this. Jacob has a triple blessing. He has a blessing of the birthright from his brother Esau, which he swapped and tricked because Esau didn't want it. And then he has the blessing of Jacob, where he received the blessing through trickery. And now he has the blessing of God that he received from God, not through trickery, but just through determination. And so now he has the blessing. He said, I will not leave until you bless me. And so he blessed him. This is an amazing story where God spoke to him and gave him a blessing. Well, then we find out the name of it. He called the name of the place Peniel, for I have seen God face to face, and my life is preserved. That's why I think this is not an angel. He said, and Pane means face, El means God, Peniel, the face of God. For I have seen God face to face, and my life is preserved. So he had a vision, a wrestling match with God, and he could see who he was in the dark. He said, I've seen him, and my life is preserved. Just as he crossed over Penuel, the sun rose, and he limped on his hip. So he's now seeing that there's a price to be paid for wrestling with God. And then we have a little cleanup in verse 32. Therefore, to this day, which is true today, the children of Israel do not eat the muscle that shrank, which is on the hip socket, because he touched the socket of Jacob's hip in the muscle that sank. So even today, in honor of this event, the Jewish people are careful about what they eat. I have 5 takeaways that I'd like to share with you. The first one is that God keeps his promises. That God says what he will do, and then he does it. And if you're reminded back in Genesis 28:15, that God said, I will stay with you until I complete my task. And he was with him. Right here, he shows up, the angels of God show up, and he keeps his promises. Also, godly people see their wickedness. They see their weaknesses. Jacob the trickster became Jacob the prayer, the one who recognizes that he was not so full of himself, but that he needed to be full of God's presence. And then the third truth is that godly people seek a godly blessing. He was hungry for the blessing of God, which is what we must do. We must want God to bless us, and we have to go get it. We have to fight for it. We have to say, I want this. And then we have to realize that an encounter with God changes who we are. Jacob was changed from the trickster to the one who received the blessing. He was the one who experienced a change. When he met the God and he wrestled with him, he said, I'm not going anywhere until you bless me. And God blessed him, and it changed him. And the last takeaway is God blesses us when he knows us. Isaac was told by God, I will bless you. And he sees him face to face, and he asks his name, and they're exchanging names. They're knowing each other. And then he blesses him. So there has to be a personal relationship with God through Jesus in order for us to have blessings like this. And then I have a final timeless truth from this passage. With God's blessings, individuals become a godly nation. I want you to understand that Jacob was just a man, but when he received the blessing, he became the father of a nation. And you and I are just individuals, but with God's blessings, we can be part of a church that's not just individuals, but it's full of God's blessings. And we can become a church that grows in him because we are part of it. So individuals who were just separate out there like Jacob was, like Esau was, now they become part of a nation and they become ancestors of godliness. So we can become part of this blessing and God will bless us. Father, I thank you for this time together. I thank you for this word. I ask you to bless us, Father, that we will listen to you and that we will recognize that you speak to us. Help us to realize that you want an encounter with us and that we should not wrestle with you, but that we should just let you have your way in our lives. And when we do, you will get honor and glory. And we thank you for this in Jesus' name.